Hi there, welcome to Outdoor Gear Chat. This is episode 67. I'm Wayne, I'm joined as always by Cathy. Hello, Cathy, all right?
Yeah. I'm good, Wayne. Especially today because we are joined by a super special guest. And I know I often say this about our special guests because everyone's fab. Everybody knows loads of really cool stuff. But today, we're talking about a really important subject that's close to my heart. Joe Brown and the 1955 Kangchenjunga expedition. Joining us to talk about it is climber, author, and filmmaker, and a man who grew up climbing in the Rockies and Yosemite before moving to Leeds University, a pivotal time, really, 1972. Joining leading activists of the day like Joe Tasker, Brian Hall, Alex McIntyre, Al Rouse, a whole team of sort of pioneering guys tackling alpine style ascents in the greater ranges, and some of those still unrepeated, as well as larger expeditions. So to the West Ridge of Everest in the winter of 1980-81 and the Northwest Ridge of K2 in the tragic year of 1986. This gentleman was a founder of Kendall Mountain Film Festival in 1980, along with Brian Hall and Jim Curran, and also founded the Mountain Heritage Trust in 2001 with Chris Bonington and George Band. He was the president of the Alpine Club from 2017 to 2019 and currently Honourable Secretary of the Mount Everest Foundation. And on top of all that, he's also an expert on the Kangchenjunga 1955 expedition. So welcome, Mr. John Porter.
Well, thank you, Cathy. That was quite an introduction.
Yeah, well, a well-deserved introduction as well, John. Blimey. Yeah, absolutely incredible. You look like Cathy was talking about somebody else as she was giving the intro then as well. So it's like, have I really got this long list of amazing achievements? I never spoke to you before we came on, but how do we pronounce the mountain name?
You're asking the right and the wrong person. I know from friends in Nepal that there's 30 different local names for the mountain. So I always say Kangchenjunga. Some say Kangchenjunga. I think it all works because people know what we're talking about, hopefully, the world's third highest mountain. The behind the name, of course, is the meaning, which is the five treasures of the snows. Kangchenjunga, Kang meaning snow, Jung meaning great, Nang meaning five, and get it the wrong way around, Jung meaning treasure, and Unga five. So five treasures of the snows. That is Kangchenjunga.
And that awesome. Was, of course, it's on the border of India and Nepal. I think from the 1955 expedition, they approached it from the Indian side, which was Sikkim, the region of Sikkim. It was very famous because all the way through, I suppose, the colonial times, which we need to talk about, it was a hill station in Darjeeling. So it was a very visual mountain, of course, so very easy to see, whereas Everest was less so. That wasn't visible from the hill stations, and K2, of course. So it took a while to discover that Kangchenjunga wasn't actually the tallest mountain in the world, which it was kind of thought it would be. It took the Great Indian Trigonomic Survey to point out it's actually the third highest.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is so visible. It fills the northwest horizon from Darjeeling. And I think one of the reasons there's so many local Buddhist sacred stories around it and the five treasures is because it changes so much during the day. It can be golden one moment, silver the next, threatening in other times, and it forever is revealing a different face, as it were. So it is a very sacred mountain to the local people.
And it's like sacred, spiritual as well.
Yeah, well, the local people felt there was a deity living on top. And of course, when in 55, when Evans only got permission from the Shogil of Sikkim, who was the righteous and religious ruler, by promising not to in any way despoil the summit, which meant not to actually stand on the top. Of course, that's all changed now, but they didn't, and they honored that.
All right, okay, that's fascinating. So yeah, no planting the flag on the summit of it or anything like that. Then
No,
in
absolutely
this
not.
occasion.
And if you look at some of the nerds today who record these things, they don't even give the British credit for having climbed it, even though they were literally 2 meters away.
Ah, right. Okay. Cool. I did. Yeah. Sorry. That's amazing. Amazing facts. That. Yeah. It's yeah. So, but yeah, like you say, very respectful to have honoured that agreement, I guess. So we're sort of starting at the wrong end in my head. We're starting at the summit, aren't we?
We're doing top down rather than
Yeah.
bottom
Yeah.
up.
Absolutely. Which is brilliant. It's all amazing. And yeah, I know we've got so many questions. I think we could speak. Well, we probably could speak for hours on it. Tell us a little bit about how it started then. Obviously, Everest in 1953, and then there was Cathy, we were just talking before, there was like K2 and other mountains that were being summited, and then we move on to, I'm not going to try and pronounce it, Kamcha, is it? Can I say it, Kamcha? And what sort of led up to that, and how was it funded? How the attitude to the expedition, I guess.
Well, in some ways, if you look at that era, it was kind of almost the end of the Great Game, in that there were loads of nations wanting to plant their flag and claim a bit of historical territory on the summits of the great mountains of the world. And of course, Everest. Well, Annapurna started that with the French, and then Everest. The important thing about the Everest expedition was it brought together some remarkable men like Charles Evans and George Band, who would both go on to Kangchenjunga 2 years later, and of course John Hunt. And Evans was the deputy leader of Everest in 1953, good friend of Hunt's, but a much more modest and lower profile man. And on Everest in 1953, his personal Sherpa, because they all had a personal Sherpa, basically they climbed with and worked with, was a man called Dawa Tenzing. And right. They became very close friends. And from that 1954 expedition, you had the two most important people emerging in terms of Charles Evans as the leader of 1955, but equal leader, co-leader in terms of putting together a remarkable team of Sherpas was Dawa Tenzing, with all of his friends and colleagues from Solo Khumbu. They're all Solo Khumbu Sherpas. So they all knew each other well, and that was crucial to the success of the expedition.
I love the fact that they all walked from Solo Khumbu to Darjeeling as well.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Dawa Tenzing also was a friend of John Hunt. In fact, Hunt sent a telegram. Evans was with Hillary and Norman Hardy, who went to Everest, another good friend of his, and went on to Kangchen in 1955. So they were in the Barren Valley. Hillary actually had an accident, fell in a crevasse. They called an end to the expedition, and Evans and Hardy walked out all the way back to the village where Dawa Tenzing lived near Kathmandu. And awaiting them there was a telegram addressed to both Hillary and to Charles Evans, saying, would either of you like to lead a reconnaissance expedition to Kangchenjunga? Because I have permission for the full-blown thing. And so there was Evans. You can imagine him reading this telegram. Hillary had already been through on his way home, and he'd scribbled on to it, not me, over to you, Charles. So then and there, with Norman Hardy in the room and Dawa Tenzing, the team began to be formed.
It was like, off we go, chaps. It was one of those moments, was it? Yeah, brilliant.
So when he got back to Kathmandu, Evans sent a telegram to Hillary saying, delighted. Hillary wired out some money to the British Embassy for Dawa Tenzing to go up to the Khumbu and organize his team and begin the trek across, organizing supplies from Solo Khumbu over to Darjeeling to meet the team when they eventually arrived in March of 1955.
Wow. So that's incredible, isn't it? Yeah, like Hillary there going, it's up to you, mate. Basically,
over to you, Charles.
Yeah. And just picking up on the language you've used there is, it was classed as a reconnaissance expedition at the time, but I guess why was it a reconnaissance expedition? There was a bigger plan following on from it.
Well, a lot of people had written off the southwest face of that approach as a possible climb. There have been German attempts, Willy Bauer and Durenfurth, an international team, in the 1929 and 31 for the Bauer attempts, 1930 for the Durenfurth attempt, which included Frank Smythe, the famous British climber. And Smythe had basically written off the southwest approach and said, no, it's just not worth putting any effort into that. It looks far too difficult. As had Freshfield in his circumnavigation way back in 1899. But a guy called John Kemp, who was a headmaster in India at the time, organized a small team and went in 53. And he, from the top of the North Peak of Kabru, looked across and said, I think you can put something together here. So he wrote a report for John Hunt, and it was on the back of that Hunt said, right, let's go have a look at the southwest face. But because there was so much uncertainty, that's why it was seen to be a reconnaissance as opposed to the full-blown thing. And of course, George Band later commented, we took our reconnoitering very seriously, right up to the top.
I was going to say, yeah, too seriously, a lot of people would argue probably there, yeah. And yeah, it's fascinating looking at the timescale between, like you said, the the German attempts or whatever back in the late 20s, early 30s, right the way through. It's a chunk of time that passed between then and 1955, obviously, isn't it? Which is really interesting. Or was everyone too focused on Everest after, well, and the war, obviously? But
yeah. No, I think the war got in the way of a lot of things.
Touch.
And Sikkim actually closed its borders after the 55 expedition as well.
Right.
Because at that time it was still an independent nation. It wasn't until somewhat later it was absorbed into India. So there was a lot of politics going on as well.
Yeah, and well, I guess a fair chunk of conflict in that general area as well, was there, around that?
Yeah.
Am I getting my history all wrong?
Well, there were some incursions by the Chinese, and of course Nepal was still closed until 1960. So.
And then, was there any technological advancements, and particularly now, as he says, wearing a watch with all sorts of tech bred into it? But did the equipment differ much between the Everest expedition in 53 and this one in 55? Then,
it was very much modelled on what they had in 53, which of course was very much the realm of a man called Griff Pugh, Dr. Pugh, who was the first to sort of, realize that it takes more than the strength of nature, as Melanie Windridge would say, it's the strength of will to get to the top of a mountain. There's a lot of science involved. And they were forever improving things. Charles Evans with Tom Bourdillon may very well have been the first at the summit of Everest in 53 if their closed circuit oxygen sets hadn't frozen on the south summit. So that was one of the first things they improved quite a bit between 53 and 55, even though they found in the end that the open oxygen systems were preferred by most of the climbing team. Apart from that, diet was far more improved. The food was organized basically around individual tastes. So you didn't have your sort of set menu. People, they asked everybody what they wanted to eat high on the mountain, and they then made sure that the food was to the taste of the people going onto the mountain. And it was one of the first expeditions also where the entire team, every bit of equipment was kind of custom made. All the sizes were taken both for the Sherpa team and for the climbers. They ordered stuff to those designs, and it's great in the exhibition in London and out in Nepal at the moment. You can see the original molds of the feet and crampon sizes for the Sherpas, etc.
Yeah, so wow, that's amazing, isn't it?
It was well thought. It was thought through, because an individual on a big mountain like that has to feel comfortable in as many ways possible.
Sorry, Cathy,
Yeah,
go.
sorry, no, it's quite extraordinary, like for all of the stuff that was when you go through in Charles Evans' book, The Untrodden Peak, at the back there's a kit list of what everybody had, and it's fascinating to go through and get a real sense of the clothing and the woolen jumpers and the RAF silk liner glove, and a lot of it was made specifically by British companies with input from the team or with Dr. Pugh. But there is actually one item that was used on the trip that we still sell, and that is, we've mentioned this in a number of different podcasts, Wayne, but the little Dachstein glove is we still sell tons every winter. The boiled wool glove, they're absolutely fantastic, and still they're available to buy regardless of all advances in kit. And actually, it was only recently we stopped selling the woolly balaclavas as well, and those were a very important piece of kit. And you can see them. There's fantastic free to access film footage, amateur film footage available on the internet. I think it's on the British Film Institute website. And you can actually see there's some black and white and there's some colour, and you can see the kit in use, and the oxygen kits alone, must have weighed well, not a ton, but you just can't believe how much that must have weighed. And using multiple layers, everything was layers, whether it was clothing on the body or socks and boots and over boots or gloves and mitts, trying to work with tiny small oxygen sets and fixing those at altitude in extreme cold. And there's also on the hardware side some great descriptions in Joe's book, in Charles's book, about wondering as they went up to the summit if they should carry on cutting steps in the ice with their ice axes or trust their crampons. And I just read that thinking, I've never even had to think about, do I trust my crampons to cut steps? You just use them. I've always had them on the bottom of my boots, but at that period, it's still something. Everything was sort of moving at rocket speed and advancing so quickly, but there was still the traditional methods there. And I just thought, gosh, not just having that thought process and at that kind of altitude and at that kind of stress level is quite amazing.
On the crampon side, you just have to remember they were still 10-point crampons.
Of course, yeah, and so I think they would have been, they wouldn't have been modular or anything like that, would they? They would have been pieces built around the boot.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been solid. They would have been flexible, and strapped on with rather primitive leather straps. I mean, when I started ice climbing in the early '60s, it was the same. We only had 10-point crampons, and cutting steps was on steep ice was hard work.
Yeah,
and it was the same for them. I mean, they were remarkably strong. On the oxygen side, it's quite interesting, actually, because I said everything was designer made, and especially the oxygen mask. But of course, on a long expedition like that, you lose a couple of stones.
yes.
And so a lot of the problems they had with snow blindness were the result of the oxygen mask becoming loose fitting. So the goggles then began to steam up, and Joe Brown
just took them off.
That's right. They took them off, and a lot of the members ended up with snow blindness for that reason. Again, something which is now not an issue, but
yeah, I remember Joe describing that, and one of our many kitchen sessions when we were sitting having a cup of tea with him, but he actually used exactly the same words he used in his book, which was it just felt like somebody had just hauled out his eyelids and just chucked burning coals in. It was incredibly painful, and having to come down and descend terrain like that, and not being able to see, and in that just continual pain, even after being loaded up with codeine, he described as well. It's deeply unpleasant. As you say, John, he wasn't alone. There was I think John Jackson had a rough time of it as well.
Had a bit. Yeah, I've had it in my life as well. So
Yeah, not to be
All-
repeated, I guess.
No.
I guess, and I guess that, like you're saying about losing weight, you almost can't take in enough calories because you're burning so much in those conditions. It's physically demanding. It's cold, so you got that burning that going on as well. You've got the stress of the situation as well. And I've got to say it was interesting, your piece on diet, like nutrition as well. So the question I had was, did they take like 25 cases of brandy with them as on previous mountain expeditions? I can't remember where I read that, where it was, there was one expedition where they'd taken so many cases of champagne, so many cases of rum, and so on up a mountain somewhere.
I think that was on Rum Doodle, wasn't it?
I think that might have been Rum Doodle.
Was it? Yeah. And this was a bit more scientific by this stage, but still struggling to take in those calories that were essential for them they needed to.
To maintain your weight above 20,000 feet, you need something between 4.5 and 5,000 calories a day.
Wow.
And there's no way you get even close to half that.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Just carrying those calories somewhere close to where you're going to be doing it would be an incredible feat on its own, wouldn't it? But
five Starbucks caramel lattes.
Yeah. A good chunk of Big Macs or something like that would do it. We're not. Yeah.
Well, of course they did have their mint cake.
Quiggins Kendall mint
Is it
cake.
Quiggins? Yeah, thank you, John. As a proud Kendalian, that's the secret to my height. I always say I'll have to ask my mum. I was babysat by a daughter of one of the mint cake empires back in the day. So I was born and bred in Kendal. But so that's amazing to hear.
There's a wonderful moment in George's and in Joe's writing as well, where when they finally reached the ridge and they were looking up the very formidable summit pinnacle, they stopped for a Kendal mint cake and a swig of lemonade to
brilliant.
to
Absolutely
take it all
love
in.
that. Yeah, wow.
Joe only talked. He didn't do very many public talks. I know he did a talk about Kangchenjunga for the Alpine Club. Obviously, the Alpine Club and the Mount Everest Foundation were key sponsors to the 55 expedition. But he did do one at Llanberis Film Festival, which I think it was 2016, 2017. It was really rare for him to talk. And we took our girls along with us, who were only small, but the whole room was just packed out, and you could not hear a pin drop the whole time he was talking. He was absolutely brilliant. There was one thing, he just had the whole place in hysterics, looking forward to these tin peaches that as part of the diet, that had they got all these fantastic new foods, and he and George Band, I think, were really looking forward to these tin peaches, and they carried them all the way up to a particular section, sat down. Obviously they didn't have napkins, but you can kind of just like, right, we're in for some
setting the dining table
now.
up.
And they finally got the can open with the ice axe, and everything was frozen. The tin peaches were completely frozen, and they were absolutely gutted.
I still had them. Did they not work as an ice pop? No,
well,
it's probably not the same.
Might be a bit big.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Although they probably stick to Dachsteins very well.
But so we are jumping about, which is brilliant, because it's just with so many questions about it. But was there something in particular that determined both? I think in my mind is both the difference between the reconnaissance expedition and achieving, and actually summiting. And was there something involved in that? What sort of decisions led to them summiting in the end, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I think working as a team. I know it's a bit lateral thinking, but the fact that they got on so incredibly well made them very tenacious. And not many teams would have sat through that storm they sat through at Camp 4 for 60 hours, or had the disaster they had at Camp 5 with an avalanche, were basically losing most of their forward equipment and food and having to replenish it. And I just think they were saying, we're going to get up this darn thing together. And that was, as I say, part of that unique feeling that the Sherpas and the the Western climbers were very much working together. Yes, there was a client-Sherpa relationship. The Sherpas were being paid and the climbers weren't, but they shared that objective, and the fact they were all good friends. I mean, they're all on first-term basis. If you look at any of the photographs from the time, you can see they just got on extremely well. They sang together, they laughed together, they ate together, and they climbed together. They were very much set on the course of trying to get to the top, and there were a lot of, they tripped over bad luck, as you do, but they got over all that. And because also there was a bit of pressure off, because Everest had been climbed. Okay, it was the third highest mountain. And there was a bit of, we're out, lads and chaps out together. Let's just get on. We got the time, we got the plan, we got the resources. It is incredible. I mean, one of the things that you don't, they had to get 1.5 tons of equipment onto the mountain up to Camp 5 over the period of a month to have a chance at the top. And they had the teamwork and the logistics together to bring that together, to make it happen. So there was an awful lot going on. Mechanically, the plan was in place to overcome any of the technical and indeed the weather problems which they encountered, and there were plenty of both.
Was it Camp 2 where George Band was just using a piece of chalk to note on his tent how many avalanches there were? And it was one every 20 minutes, I think, wasn't it? He recorded over a 24-hour period. The whole area must, just there's so much movement. Yeah, that kind of sort of noise, and with the storms as well, it must really prey on your mind, over that kind of time period.
Yeah, I think that they had a lot of difficulties even getting to base camp. They had three intermediary camps leading to, well, they had 2 base camps. Originally they tried the route that Kemp had looked at, and then they moved to where Pasha's grave was, which gave them a kind of a bypass route of the first ice field, which is the most difficult. And one of the, as you say, Cathy, one of the most ingenious things, by studying the mountain for so many days and weeks, they could actually then piece together in their minds the safest possible route. There were a lot of their camps built under ice cliffs and put in places where, like Camp 4 on the shelf, it was not going to be avalanche. But of course, Camp 5 was a different story. That got wiped out, and it was just a good thing there was nobody in it at the time, or it would have been a different story.
Yeah, wow. So there's a good bit of tenacity, as you said, but also an amount of luck going on in there, or maybe management of the conditions, I suppose, in some respects as well. And just how long did it take them then? So I'd not picked up on how long, from, I don't know, from I guess that telegram that they received to summiting, but also then being I don't know, being close to being at the base camp or whatever, I guess.
It's kind of important point you make there, Wayne, because how long it took was actually from that first telegram to the top, which is, the projects then were conceived of and worked out over many months, if not years. And I think that is part of a process, part of the, the journey being more important than the arrival is an important point. So, I mean, from the time they left Darjeeling, and, they had to sail out, that was sort of like a 6-week journey, and it was a month then from the middle of March to the middle of April, and then another more or less 2 months on the mountain. So it was putting they had the time to put the effort in, and of course that's very important now. People that we read plans to go and climb Everest in 6 days from London or whatever.
Yeah.
Where's the fun in that? I don't get it.
Yeah.
They weren't there to set records, or I think I don't even think they even thought about it as the world's 3rd highest mountain. They're there to go climbing and to make the most of it.
Yeah, no, I don't know. It almost seems to. I remember reading Biggles when I was much younger. I don't know whether you remember whether you know that, John. But yeah, and it always seems like there was the camaraderie. It was a bunch of lads off to do something, and it seems like in some respects some of the expeditions were a little bit like that. It's a bunch of mates going to do something amazing, absolutely, and significantly challenging. But yeah, like you say, the infrastructure that we have now to be able to do Everest, for example, most definitely wasn't there then, was it? It was, yeah, a whole different ball game.
Well, it isn't. You can't just buy a package holiday, which basically
yeah.
what Everest and all the 8,000
Yeah.
are. And the infrastructure there was a lot of diplomacy still involved. There was huge logistics. You already mentioned the equipment having to be made and purchased. Interesting that most of the hard work came from the continent, from Gravel and Petzl and people like that, and Chalet. But all that had to then be boxed up, and you had then all the bureaucracy of the India office to go through, making sure that you had every single item mentioned so you could avoid it being confiscated by the bureaucrats when you get to Bombay. And also they needed to have the permit to go into Nepal and have a similar set of documents for that small time they were in Nepal. So it was a huge undertaking. It was kind of end of empire, but it was an empire project within that context.
Yeah, and that one of the team members as well. Is it Tony Strether? Tony Strether? Tony Strether. Yeah. So he was fluent in Hindi or Urdu, I think.
Hindu. I think he was very fluent in Hindu and Urdu, and they had good. Obviously the Sherpas were very conversant. But I think George at one point talks about on the way out on the boat they had far too much. It was a first-class boat only, by the way.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Of course it was.
Joe was actually complaining about there being too much good food because he wasn't used to it. So he invented things like bum skipping with a skip rope.
The bum skipping. There is a thing as well. If there is a world champion bum skipper these days as well.
So they would spend as much time as they possibly could climbing the rigging and skipping ropes before they ate again. But and then they'd have their, as George Ban wrote, their afternoon lessons with Strether in shorts and just a loincloth with his legs crossed, teaching them Hindi in the afternoon.
I love the real juxtaposition, because obviously the team. The other thing we sort of haven't touched on yet is how important the expedition was at the time socially as well, because the sport very traditionally had started off. Mountaineering had been a gentleman's sport. The Alpine Club at the time, its headquarters was on Pall Mall. It was all quite different, and Joe was invited, obviously, as a very as a hard climber, and had one very important alpine season to his name. But when he met with his Sherpa, Angtember, I think was his Angtember, was his Sherpa. He looked at the Sherpas had, it wasn't like a passport, but at the time they had a document signed by previous expeditions to show their experience, and Joe explained opening it up and looking at it and seeing how many times Angtember had been above sort of 20,000 feet, and just thinking, whoops,
I need to listen to this.
And Joe was a builder and grown up in Manchester, and all of a sudden, I guess, found himself on this first-class ship sailing halfway around the world, which must have been a real, well, obviously he enjoyed the food very much, but it must have been a real experience. And then the other major key point, of course, he and George Band were first to the summit, or just below the summit, on the 25th of May, and then the 26th of May, two other team members summited, and I've just
Strether and Hardy.
Thank you, Norman Hardy and Tony Strether.
Yeah.
And Joe and George's ascent, I think Joe just automatically looked at rock as an option, and pulled off a very difficult climbing move on rock to pull up onto the final ridge. And the second day, the second team looked at a snow route and took a different route to the summit, which was fantastic. And we do talk about Joe Brown and band, obviously, because we have the Joe Brown shots, we talk about those too, but there were obviously other people summiting as well, but they wouldn't have been able to get there without the team as a whole, right from the doctor and the 300 porters that walked them in.
Yeah, I mean, well, Joe was famous as a crack climber, wasn't he? There are other ways they could have climbed the west face of the Blatter, apart from the now infamous Brown, Fisher Brown, which is a bloody awkward offwards. So I think he was just repeating he was in his element.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a crack here, George. I'm going to go up this. Whereas Tony, Strother, and Hardy, particularly, they were both experienced alpine climbers. Just looked a little bit further afield and found an easy snow ramp, which gave them an extra hour on the summit because George and Joe obviously climbed a much more difficult, more direct route to the top.
The thought of doing technical climbing at that kind of altitude is just insane.
And then you mentioned, Joe Brown. It was again a time of social change. There was a lot of things happening in Britain in the 50s. A lot of movements of women artists and finding voices who didn't have voices before. And Joe became the perfect model of the working class hero, unlike Don, who could be a bit violent at times. So even though Don was considered for the trip, he was certainly not going to be invited. So they had a lot of confidence in Joe. They knew he was a very mild-mannered man. He got on well with everybody. The one big difference is he smoked cigarettes rather than pipes. And of course, years later, he commented, "I didn't realize how antisocial I was smoking cigarettes up to Camp 4 without asking permission." But, if you read his book, and they got on extremely well. They all did as a team. And it was funny when Joe got back to speak to Zoe Brown. I can't quite remember whether Joe met his bank manager on the street or he went in, but his bank manager said, "Well, Mr. Brown, now that you're a famous man, we better talk to you about a mortgage for your house." So it opened up doors for Joe and for many other people who followed in his footsteps, which wouldn't have happened otherwise. And of course, he himself became a well-known TV personality and a really important figure in the BBC, and it was a breakthrough. Interestingly enough, there was a documentary, and I think it was the first documentary made by Richard Attenborough when he was at the BBC of the first ascent of Kangchenjunga. So that came out in 1955, I believe, and it was produced by the great man himself.
Wow.
But Joe wasn't in the studio. Now, whether that was because they were still only allowing proper BBC English at the BBC in 56. I suspect that might have been the reason.
Well, rather than regional accent.
Within 10 years, through his connections with Macnaught Davis and others, Joe became a TV personality himself.
Wow.
Yeah,
there's just an amazing amount of social cultural history within all of that, isn't there? It's just phenomenal. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an important expedition, and I suppose because of Everest in 53, it's kind of just been overshadowed a bit, really. And I'm just psyched that we've been able to talk with you, John, and really sort of shine some light on the real far-reaching effects of this early mountaineering feat. And I think it's fantastic that everybody had a brilliant time on the mountain, but it really was a pivotal time and opened up paths that we're all sort of going to climbing walls now and enjoying very broad range of climbing, but really it all stems from these early days and these early expeditions and the work that was put into those and the support of the Alpine Club and the Mount Everest Foundation, really.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And Joe Brown.
Very definitely, very important guy. And I mean, I think he says this in his book as well, when he came back, he flew back, didn't he? A lot of the team came back on the Circassian, the boat that they'd
on the first class
travelled out on, the first class boat. Yeah. Joe actually got permission to fly home because first mail that came up at the end of the expedition, he discovered that his partner at the time, his girlfriend Val, had a motorbike accident. So he flew home to see her, and when he got to her house, he had to kind of work his way through a little gaggle of reporters who were trying to interview him before he could get in and see Val and make sure she was okay.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing story as well. And it actually, again, to show you the friendship, later on that year, Dougal Tenzing and young Chop came to Britain. They were flown by the team over to join the lecture team. And Eric Jones, our famous Eric Jones of Wales, can remember years ago 2 Sherpas coming to his school and doing a talk on Kangchenjunga sometime in the autumn of 54. And it took us a little while to piece together that must have been Dougal Tenzing.
Oh, wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a small world.
It is.
But that's incredible, isn't it?
Isn't it just? I guess, yeah, one of the questions that I have is about, why do we not hear more about this attempt, right? Why is it? I guess I understand to a certain extent why it's been eclipsed by Everest in 53, but why don't people know more about this success now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of things tend to fly in under the radar. And it didn't have the same impact. It didn't happen on Coronation Day like Everest did. And I'm not sure I can fully understand that myself, Wayne, because not only was it, I'd say along with Maclou, of course, the French climbed Maclou that same year, and Evans, got in touch with the French afterwards, and they got on extremely well. Those were the 2 most difficult mountains. Probably even more so than K2 that had been climbed at the time. But a lot of, even today, the best climbs, very few people hear about. It is a kind of a small community thing. And it may have also been the nature of Charles Evans. He wrote a wonderful book, but I think he was a very modest man who wasn't seeking the limelight. And also, I think John Hunt being a military man and part of the establishment, whereas Charles wasn't really, and George went off to work for Shell, and Joe went and opened up a shop and began to make equipment for the average and common man, to go climbing with. Actually, it's a funny story, because one of my first Joe Brown rucksack, I could never quite understand why, when I was bivvying in it, it didn't actually come up right to the bottom of my cag. So if it snowed or rained overnight, I always ended up with a very wet lower half of my body. And of course, Joe designed it for himself. And when years later, I actually went rock climbing with Joe, I got the answer. It worked for him, but not for everybody.
All 5'4" of him.
I was going to say that as you stood beside him, and he was decidedly. I'm 6'6" when I'm stood up, John. So I know. I find it hard to find a sleeping bag that I can actually sleep in that doesn't. That covers any of my body, to be honest. But I can understand that.
I mean, we're here 70 years later talking about this fantastic expedition and the Western climbers and the Sherpa team that worked together to achieve the not quite the summit, almost the summit. But that as well, just having respect for the local people, and their request was, and their wish was, to leave the top unsullied, and they did that. And I think that also, that deserves recognition.
No, it's very respectful.
The whole story is just the whole thing, the whole expedition is just amazing, isn't it? I've still got a list of thousands of questions. Probably, if we carry on talking, I'll be coming out with all sorts of nonsense.
The really good news is there's more to see about this expedition, because John is working on a film currently, and it'll be great to hear more about that, John. But it's also part of a much bigger project, isn't it? So perhaps you could just give us an overview of that.
Yeah, I can do. Obviously, last year, 24 was another major anniversary. This is the 70th of the ascent of Kangchenjunga, but last year was the 100th anniversary of the 1924 expedition where 4 people died, including Mallory and Irving, obviously, very famously, and kind of the end of an era. Interestingly enough, Dower Tenzing was on that expedition in 1924. He was 14 years old. He was a cook boy and low-level porter on the north side of Everest.
No way.
And he actually wrote about, the loss of 2 lovely, Englishmen on the mountain. So I was asked to make a film. It's called Everest Revisited, which has done well. It's won a few awards and was part of the big Reggae exhibition recently. I don't know if you had a chance to get up to see that.
Yeah, I went and watched the film. I really enjoyed the film, actually. Yeah. But the whole expedition was exceptionally well done. It was really good.
Oh, thanks. It was a lot of fun doing it with the Reggae team. But so I put together that film, and I was out in Nepal and came back to an Alpine Club board meeting. I was still on a committee meeting. I was still on the committee. And apparently after the big celebration for the Himalayan Trust, I'll come on to them in a minute, Sir Graham Wrigley and Simon Richardson, our current president of the Alpine Club, happened to have a meal together, and I imagine a glass or 2 of wine. So in any other business in the committee meeting, Simon said, "Oh yeah, I do have one thing, John. We'd like you to make a film on Kangchenjunga because there is this big project which I need to tell you about." And so I said, "Okay, tell me about it." Anyway, so Graham then explained to me the Tapoljung area, which is the Nepali side of Kangchenjunga, is a phenomenally unique high mountain area from subtropical right up to high alpine in terms of fauna and flora. You have very rare animals there, like the Tibetan wolf and the red panda, probably the highest population of snow leopards. You have plants of every single description and the most remarkable rhododendron forest you'll find anywhere. It's a very difficult terrain. And unlike Khumbu, where there were 30 to 40,000 trekkers into base camp last year, there were only 500 trekkers going to Tapoljung. So Nepal's at a crossroads. Obviously, a lot of people are making money out of the mountains, and Khumbu and Annapurna circuit no longer exists, apart from one day. You can take a jeep the rest of the way. But the Tapoljung area and that whole approach, 8-9 day walk into base camp, has this amazing scenery to go through. And the Himalayan Trust at UK, and the Himalayan Trust, which originally was established by Hillary, was dedicated to education, to environmental projects, and to helping out Nepal in any way possible. George Ban became the second president of the Himalayan Trust, and he was in love with Tapoljung. Having climbed Kanch, he went back there many times. He fell in love with the communities. And he shifted the Himalayan Trust's interests from Khumbu, where there was plenty going on, towards Kangchenjunga. And that has been carried on to the next level by Sir Graham Wrigley now, who is the current chair of the Himalayan Trust. And he is working with community-based projects in Nepal, the Kangchenjunga Conservation Area, which is a huge community organization of people living in the area who want to see sustainable tourism and the preservation of that unique ecological system rather than the arrival of masses of new roads and buses. So the films I've been making, and I made a little one for the Samudra Pahad, which is the Kathmandu-based charity that's running the sustainable tourism project from that end. And all this is being rolled out as we speak, with UNESCO hopefully, it's pretty certain it will be declared a world biodiversity area in 2 years' time. And hopefully by that time, there will be a plan in place to secure a sustainable future for the region, sustainable tourism, more people, but better control, so that it simply isn't just a matter of roads being driven through and dams being built. It will be an area unique, a proper national park, where only trekkers will be allowed in, paying more, definitely, but it'll be worth it because it is such a unique area. So I've just been delighted to have a chance to work with all the people I've met within Nepal now, and Graham Wrigley himself, to play a small part in spreading that message.
Oh, amazing. And we mentioned earlier there is an exhibition currently as well at the Alpine headquarters on Charlotte Street in London, Kangchenjunga, the 5 treasuries of the snows.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can go and book. I think you need to book to go.
Yep.
Just to make sure that it can be staffed, and you can find the details about that at www.alpine-club.org.uk. And I'm going to find an excuse to go to London and go and have a look, especially about the kit.
And the big event, for the Himalayan Trust, is at the Royal Geographic Society on the 5th of June, and that is an all-evening event. It's being organized by Rebecca Stevens, who's our current chair of the Mount Everest Foundation. So it's very fitting that she's organized as the chair of the Mount Everest Foundation, which the Kanch 55 expedition was the first ever funded by the MEF. Okay. And that has some remarkable speakers. There'll be Sherpas coming over, the 3 local men who've climbed Kanch. And there'll be a lot of the families of all of the 55 team there, and it's a wonderful lineup of speakers. So if you look at it's called K70. If you Google Himalayan Trust UK or K70, you can find more details on that. And I have another little film I'm making for that one in advance of the main Alpine Club film, which will be done by the middle of May to hit the film festival circuit.
Oh, super. Oh, looking forward to seeing that. In addition, and in a small way to that, we have a competition running throughout the summer, which will be launched on the 25th of May, which was the day that George Band and Joe Brown stood just about on the summit of Kangchenjunga, and that is Kangchenjunga 8586. And 8586 is the height in meters of the mountain, and we're going to get people to celebrate their ascent of 8,586 meters with our friends on UK Climbing, and there'll be more information on that coming out over our social media channels building up to that 25th of May release date. So lots of fun there, and there will be a super prize from our sponsors at Sunto, who are offering a watch of your choice, so you can get involved and win a great prize there. The Mount Everest Foundation, as we've mentioned, was founded in 1955, and it still funds exploratory, scientific and mountaineering expeditions across the globe. You can find out if you're eligible at their website, which is www.mef.org.uk. So there's loads going on, isn't there, for the 70th anniversary for this ascent, and it's great to be able to be part of that. It's been fantastic to talk with you today, John. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Cathy and Wayne. It's been my pleasure to have a chance to talk about everything to do with Kangchenjunga and the remarkable men of 1955. They still live with us, certainly in the hearts and minds of mountaineers.
Indeed, yeah, it's just remarkable. Thanks so much, John. It was amazing. It's jaw-dropping, astounding. I love speaking to people like yourself. It's just fantastic to hear everything that was involved in it.
So if you have listened to this and got all inspired and are planning a big trip, then we have the kit to help you with that, and you can find that at www.climbers-shop.com. However, if you are inspired to get out in the British Hills and try an adventure of your own choosing, we've got a huge amount of free to access information, resources, skills and knowledge base. And you can find that at our website, the Joe Brown Outdoor Academy, and that is www.joebrown.org.uk. jobrownoutdooracademy.com.
And we've got loads of podcasts on other subjects as well.
We do, even climbing an 8,000 meter peak.
Yeah, well, yeah, blimey, yeah. I think we've got a couple of those, haven't we? Yeah.